All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Lecture 5 on the French Revolution. This is the final lecture on the French Revolution, and we'll cover from the execution of the king to the Reign of Terror to the Committee for Public Safety, and then we'll talk a little bit about the legacy of the French Revolution. So, as you can see on the slide, we have a picture of King Louis XVI head being chopped off by the guillotine. And on January 17th, 1793, Louis XVI was convicted of treason, which is sabotaging the state, aiding the enemies of the state. In this case, King Louis, as the monarch, aided the monarchs and not the revolutionary cause. So the Mountain, the radical group of Jacobins, convinced the National Convention to charge King Louis XVI with treason for conspiring with Austria and Prussia against France. He was found guilty and he was sentenced to death, and the execution method was the guillotine. He was killed 4 days after his sentence, and this begins what we call the rise of Robespierre's Committee of Public Safety. And you can see on the slide here that you have a citizen who's petitioning the Committee for Public Safety. The committee does not look like they're acting very kindly towards the citizen's petition. They were not sympathetic. The committee was created to cease or ease or eliminate an internal rebellion that happened with the radicals in 1793. The committee was given dictatorial powers, and it ruled France for nearly a year. So after the execution of the king, the National Convention declared war on England and Holland, who had joined the first coalition against France. Spain later joins the coalition as well, so they're fighting Britain, Holland, Spain, Prussia. But in the spring of 1793, a pro-monarchy revolt happens in the region of La Vendée in the French countryside. And in order to deal with this crisis, the National Convention creates a Committee of Public Safety. This committee is given broad powers in order to eliminate this uprising. So it's originally headed by Danton, Georges Danton, but the committee ends up ruling with almost dictatorial power, which is kind of ironic because there's supposed to be a committee about making the public safe and giving people freedom. But they wind up with like king-like power for at least a year. And this is what proves fatal for the revolution. The duties of the committee are kind of plain at first, very simple. The committee is charged with the tasks of drafting people into the army, which you know as the levée en masse. The committee went beyond this and rapidly begins expanding its authority in order to safeguard the revolution. So its leading members were Danton, Marat, Jean-Paul Marat, and Robespierre, Maximilien Robespierre. Initially, Danton dominated the committee. However, he begins to advocate some more relaxed or conciliatory policies, and by the summer of 1793, he'd been replaced by Robespierre. And some of Robespierre is considered a radical Jacobin. Robespierre transforms the committee into an instrument by which he can rid himself of any of his rivals and enemies. And Robespierre uses the power of the committee to more or less seize control of the National Convention, and then he gives himself and the committee even more power. And at this point, the committee is essentially a dictatorship. And this is where we begin the Reign of Terror. So the Reign of Terror is a series of public executions that culminate with the death of Robespierre. So Robespierre and the Committee for Public Safety held power from July 1793 to July 1794. This one-year period is known as the Reign of Terror. It includes a series of purges, much like the popular movie The Purge, that take place in which nearly 40,000 people that Robespierre labels as enemies of the revolution go to the guillotine. So I think it was 38,000 people were killed in total, but let's just round it up to 40. The Reign of Terror spares no one. Nobles, clergy, and members of the Third Estate are all killed. And among the famous figures executed in this period were Danton, the members of the National Convention who opposed Robespierre, and the beautiful Queen Marie Antoinette. In fact, you can see them holding up Marie Antoinette's head in this picture right here. This is her execution, which of course there was no photography then. This was painted, or this was charcoal drawing. And you can see the crowd seems to be very enthusiastic about Marie Antoinette getting her head chopped off. So finally, in July 1794, some members of the National Convention, who are afraid of their own safety, they're fearing for their own lives, they have Robespierre and his followers arrested and sent to the guillotine. And here's where the revolution finally turns on itself and the reign of terror ends. So next we're going to go to what's called the Thermidorean reaction. And this is the overthrow of Robespierre and the Committee for Public Safety. When they throw them out, it took place on the date of 9 Thermidor on the revolutionary calendar. The Committee of Public Safety is dismantled, and so are all the radical Jacobin clubs. And so, even some churches reopened, many political prisoners are released, and even the royal-friendly émigrés begin returning from other countries. So there's a new constitution that's adopted in August of 1795, and the executive branch changes its name again and becomes the Directory. So in order to prevent any official group from dominating and taking over the national government, like the way the Committee for Public Safety had, another new constitution is written and adopted in August 1795. It creates a two-house parliament, which appoints an executive directory of 5 men. Although it's supposed to be democratic, the new constitution only gives the right to vote to about 20,000 men, and these 20,000 men are mostly from the upper middle class. So the Thermidorean reaction again seems like a step back from the Republic government. Again, remember, the mob, or this revolutionary fervor that is spreading, is chaotic, and it turns on itself, and it's really hard to rule and run a country when things are chaotic and people are being killed. So the Directory is our next slide, and the Directory promotes middle-class interests. It tries to manage its financial crisis. It oversees these unfortunate periods of food shortages where there are additional riots in Paris. And the Directory is kind of marked by the rise of Napoleon. You can see this cartoon is picturing the errors and bad judgment of the Directory, and it looks like this middle-class person has kind of fallen off the throne, and they've fallen into like a land of mistakes, and everything's just kind of strewn around here. So, in a nutshell, the Directory's tenure is marked by scandal, financial troubles, and political arguments. The Directory only promoted middle-class interests, which irritate the working poor. Also, France is in a period of runaway inflation, where prices are going up, costs of everything are going up, but wages are not. They're also having food shortages. The people of Paris are rebelling. They're rioting in the streets again. So the Directory has to call in the army to put down the riots. And one such riot in 1795 was ended by the intervention of the army under the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte. And as a reward for his actions, Napoleon is given command of the French forces fighting the Austrians in Italy. So, and we know Napoleon is going to have a large meteoric rise. Here you see him on horseback. Napoleon, his popularity increases after he defeats the Austrians in battle. There's an additional conflict with England. There's the 1799 coup d'etat. and then the consulate that we'll be talking about. So Napoleon's victories over the Austrians end the war and allow France to gain extremely good terms, favorable terms, in the subsequent peace treaty. These achievements make Napoleon a national hero. He next receives command of an army that's training to invade England. Napoleon, though, thinks an invasion of England is not the best strategic move, and he decides to instead strike at England's colonies in an attempt to take over Egypt. So French troops move in and assume control over Egypt. However, the British Navy, under Admiral Nelson, destroys the French fleet at Aqaba Bay in 1799, leaving Napoleon stranded in Egypt. Meanwhile, back in France, the Directory is becoming more and more unpopular. With the Directory on shaky ground, Napoleon takes this opportunity to come back and seize power. He abandons his troops in Europe and he returns to France. On November 9th, 1799, with the support of the army in France, Napoleon executes a successful coup d'etat and overthrows the Directory. The French Revolution ends November 9th, 1799. This new government is called a consulate. It's put in place. The consulate is a republican form of government in theory that is headed by 3 consuls, one of which, Napoleon, is the first consul, and he quickly takes complete control of the entire government, and in 1802 he makes himself consul for life. So here on our next slide is a picture of Napoleon becoming the emperor. In 1804, Napoleon crowns himself. He takes the crown from the Pope and makes himself emperor for life, Napoleon I. So the great revolutionary ideals and the goals of the old republic disappear into the imperial government of a former Corsican general who had assumed absolute power. The French Revolution comes full circle. A country that got rid of a tyrant has now gained an emperor, right? And finally, our last slide here is the legacies of the French Revolution. It is known for being the end of absolutism, the end of a monarchy. The power of the nobles also ends. The peasants become landowners. This idea of nationalism spreads, and the Enlightenment ideals about freedom also spread. So, as is the case with all historical events, opinions vary on the importance or impact of things. What many historians agree is that the French Revolution brings an end to absolutism, and even when the monarchy is restored, it's not absolutist, meaning all-powerful in nature. The abolition of feudal privileges, the nobles lose their power and their property, the peasants and the middle class come to become landowners for the first time, and France becomes a nation of small landowning farmers. The revolution and the foreign wars associated with it also give the French people a strong sense of national identity. Loyalties shift from the king or queen to the nation. This feeling of nationalism that begins in France is spread by the revolutionary and the Napoleonic armies to the rest of Europe. And the struggle for national liberation becomes one of the most important themes of 19th and 20th century European civilization. So the Declaration of the French Rights of Man and Citizen is an outstanding example of the expression of Enlightenment ideals concerning freedom and equality and rights. These ideals, along with the notion of equality before the law, provide the basis for reform movements and new political philosophies in the 19th century. So in here you see the poster with the symbol of the French Revolution. It's liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty meaning freedom, equality meaning equality, and fraternity meaning brotherhood. That is the rallying cry or theme of the French Revolution. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Be ready for your final quiz by reviewing your notes a little bit every day, 15 minutes a night. Just go over the notes, reread the chapters, and you'll see your scores on these quizzes improving. Have a great weekend or a great evening. I'll see you all soon.